Desire is logic disguised as madness. Before words, before gestures, before courage finds its voice, a woman's readiness reveals itself through silence. Not in what she says, but in what her energy confesses. It's the slow dilation of time when she looks at you. The micro-flinch before she laughs. The way her breath synchronizes with yours without permission. These are not conscious acts. They are primal disclosures, fragments of instinct that slip through the cracks of social performance. In Jungian language, this is the anima awakening through projection, the feminine unconscious stirring in recognition of her own mirror. When she feels that recognition, she doesn't fall for you, she falls for the part of herself she forgot existed. And every cell in her body starts speaking a forgotten dialect. The language of readiness. But readiness, in this context, is not sexual. It's existential. It is the soul's whisper that says, I am willing to be seen. To be seen is the most erotic thing in the world, and the most terrifying. That is why most people hide behind charm, behind flirtation, behind perfectly curated indifference. But when a woman begins to lower that mask, the first signal emerges. The mirror signal. When she looks at you, and for a split second, she sees herself. Not the image she performs, but the truth she denies. Her pupils widen, her voice softens, her stories shift from control to confession. You have become a reflective surface, and her psyche recognizes it. Carl Jung called this the encounter with the animus, the inner masculine that resides in every woman's unconscious. Through that projection, she begins to test not your power, but your presence. She watches how your eyes hold her chaos, whether you look away or remain unmoved by the storm she hides behind her beauty. Because readiness is not the absence of fear, it's the surrender to it. A woman ready for connection is not calm. She is trembling with awareness. Her body remembers every betrayal, every silenced need, every moment she swallowed her truth to be loved. And yet, something in her dares to risk visibility again. That's the second signal, the silence between words. You'll feel it when the conversation pauses, and neither of you rushes to fill the void. That's the unconscious testing safety the same way an animal pauses before stepping closer to water. It's not hesitation. It's instinct. The feminine psyche blooms only where stillness is honored. So when you hold her silence, instead of fixing it, she begins to relax into authenticity. And once authenticity emerges, desire follows, not the shallow desire of attraction, but the sacred kind, the desire to merge, to understand, to remember. Because every genuine attraction is a mirror trying to remember its face. What she wants is not you, but the forgotten parts of herself that you awaken. Every gesture now becomes communication. The way she adjusts her hair, that's her unconscious rehearsing exposure. The way her laughter lingers, that's her nervous system mapping safety. Even the subtle alignment of her body toward yours is a gravitational confession of trust. None of this is conscious seduction. It is archetypal intelligence, the language of readiness. And if you have the awareness to see it, you will realize she's not inviting possession. She's inviting presence. Because in the modern world, desire has become contaminated by control. But at its core, it is an ancient form of communication between two souls asking, are you awake too? And when both answer yes, something holy begins to unfold. Not a performance, not a chase. A recognition quiet, primal, irreversibly. When desire descends from fantasy into flesh, the psyche begins to tremble. Beneath every touch, every glance, lies an archetypal current, ancient, mythic, unstoppable. Jung understood this as the dance between the anima and animus, the eternal polarity of consciousness and mystery. In this descent, she is not merely a woman flirting, she is the unconscious testing its reflection. Each signal becomes a cipher, a fragment of the deeper feminine intelligence that cannot be spoken outright. She does not decide to be ready, she remembers it. Readiness emerges when her soul feels mirrored, not managed. When your presence ceases to demand and begins to witness, the third signal begins here, the dissolving mask. It's subtle. You'll see it when her composure fractures for just a breath, and something vulnerable peers through. Maybe her voice breaks mid-sentence. Maybe her laughter sounds less performative, more real. In that moment, the mask she's worn, the strong, beautiful, untouchable one, begins to melt. This isn't weakness, it's initiation. In Jungian symbolism, every descent begins with a death. She must let die the persona that once kept her safe, to make room for the self that desires to feel. And the paradox is this: the more authentic she becomes, the more danger she feels, because intimacy, without illusion, is exposure. That's why so many women flirt endlessly, but rarely open, because flirting keeps the illusion alive. Openness requires ego death. When she starts showing you fragments of truth, confessions that carry pain, admissions that reveal longing, she's not trying to seduce you. She's unconsciously inviting you into the underworld of her psyche, the place where love is not cute, but sacred. To navigate this space, you must understand her duality. Every woman contains two forces: the goddess who desires creation and the wound that fears annihilation. One pulls you closer, the other pushes you away. And both are tests. When you respond with hunger, she retreats. When you respond with awareness, she unfolds. Because feminine readiness is not linear, its title. She advances and recedes, like the ocean studying the shore. Each withdrawal is not rejection, it's regulation. Her nervous system is measuring. Can my storm exist here without punishment? If the answer is yes, she begins to trust you with her shadow. This is the storm signal. It's not about tears or anger. It's about emotional truth surfacing without disguise. When she allows her frustration, her jealousy, or her desire to exist openly, she is no longer performing for acceptance. She is reclaiming her wholeness. That's when the descent becomes alchemical. You are no longer two people flirting. You are two psyches in dialogue. Your role is not to interpret her chaos, but to contain it, not by silence, but by presence. Presence is not passivity. It's mastery without manipulation. Jung called this holding the tension of opposites. It means allowing paradox without collapsing into control. You neither chase her openness nor fear her withdrawal. You let both coexist until something deeper emerges, truth without strategy. At this stage, readiness is no longer about physical access. It's about psychic alignment. She is revealing whether her unconscious trusts yours. And that is the real erotic question. Can you hold her unseen? When you can, she begins to project less and relate more. The archetypes that once blinded her, the father, the hero, the savior, start to dissolve. And in their place stands the real man, not the image she desired, but the consciousness she needed. This is where most men fail. They respond to her readiness with urgency instead of reverence. They mistake vulnerability for invitation. But a conscious man recognizes that the signals are sacred, not promises, but prayers. Because desire, in its truest form, is not about conquest. It's about communion. Two energies meeting not to take, but to transform. In this descent, she's not asking you to make her feel safe. She's asking if your presence is safety. If you can see her shadow and still remain still. If you can feel her fire and not need to own it. Only then does readiness evolve into revelation. She no longer tests your patience, she mirrors your awareness. And together, you begin to remember that desire was never about the body. It was always the soul trying to find its reflection through another. When two souls reach the threshold of revelation, the air thickens. Every silence becomes charged. Every glance carries a history older than memory. This is the stage where desire burns brightest, not because of proximity, but because of tension. Jung called it enantiodromia, the turning of opposites. It is here that attraction becomes confrontation. The psyche tests its own readiness by summoning the shadow. You will feel it. The energy shifts. Where once there was softness, there's now resistance. Where once her laughter flowed freely, now it catches in her throat. She starts to see not just the reflection of her beauty in your eyes, but the reflection of her fear. Fear of being chosen. Fear of being seen. Fear of becoming the woman she actually is. And that's when the fourth signal appears, the eclipse signal. It's the moment when her light and shadow collide, when her attraction toward you coexists with the instinct to run. She might withdraw, criticize, or question everything. Not because she's lost interest, but because she's losing control of the persona that once protected her. You are witnessing the psyche defend its boundaries against awakening. Every genuine connection threatens the ego, because love, in its purest form, is ego death. Understand this. She's not fighting you. She's fighting the part of herself that knows she's already begun to fall. The more awake she becomes, the more dangerous intimacy feels. Because real intimacy does not seduce, it reveals. It forces both of you to confront what has been hiding beneath desire, shame, longing, fear of unworthiness. Attraction, in this sense, is the psyche's most intelligent trap. It lures you into your own transformation. That's why every great love story is also a psychological crucifixion. Something must die for something real to live. And in that dying, both begin to see that readiness isn't just about her, it's about you too. Because to witness a woman's full depth, a man must face his own shadow. He must confront his impulse to control, to possess, to interpret vulnerability as invitation. Here, masculine presence is tested, not by dominance, but by stillness. Not by pursuit, but by containment. Can you stand before her when she becomes the storm? Can you hold her truth without turning it into a demand? Can you allow her withdrawal without collapsing into your own insecurity? This is where polarity either matures or collapses. If you chase, you break the spell. If you withdraw, you mirror her fear. But if you remain conscious, rooted, unreactive, she begins to trust the structure of your awareness. And within that awareness, something astonishing happens. The eclipse passes. Her defenses soften, not because you convinced her, but because her unconscious feels safe enough to unfold. That is the doorway signal. It's not a gesture or a word, it's an energetic opening. A shift in atmosphere, like the quiet that follows a storm. She doesn't need to say she's ready. You feel it in the space between you, a soft gravitational pull. The breath that slows, the gaze that lingers a moment longer than it should. This is not consent of the body yet. This is consent of the soul, the unspoken yes that precedes all others. But the psyche is sacred ground, and every doorway demands reverence, because if you rush through, you violate the very safety that made it open. The true masculine does not enter, he's invited in. He waits until her energy says yes, louder than her words ever could. Until her nervous system, her gaze, and her silence all speak the same language. I am ready to be seen. That's why Jung described the union of opposites as a sacred marriage, not a merging of bodies, but of awareness. It's the moment where both realize desire was never about fulfillment. It was always about evolution. In that confrontation, both are stripped bare. No more masks, no more games, only two reflections staring into each other's chaos and finding peace. And as the tension dissolves, what remains is not conquest, but clarity. She's not giving herself to you. She's reclaiming herself through you. The flame no longer burns to consume. It burns to illuminate. And that illumination changes everything. After every confrontation comes silence, not the empty kind, but the sacred stillness that follows revelation. The storm has passed. The mask has fallen. And what remains is truth, unadorned. She is no longer performing desire. She is inhabiting it. Readiness, now, is not an act. It is a state of being. The body becomes language. The breath becomes prayer. Everything unnecessary has dissolved. This is where consciousness meets instinct without conflict. The feminine no longer needs to prove her openness, and the masculine no longer needs to prove his power. Both exist in harmony, like day and night, recognizing their shared horizon. Jung called this the conjunctio, the sacred union that marks the end of separation. Not two halves completing each other, but two wholes mirroring their completeness. She stands before you now, not as mystery to be solved, but as mirror radiant, reflective, real. Her eyes no longer ask, "Do you see me?" They ask, "Can you meet me here?" The fifth and final signal arises quietly, the still flame. It's the calm that follows chaos, the warmth that no longer needs to burn to be felt. You will see it in her ease, the way her body softens without surrender, the way her words no longer hide between laughter. Her energy says, I trust what I awaken in you. Because readiness is not about availability. It's about awareness. A woman is ready when she no longer fears the reflection she evokes, when her desire no longer feels like exposure, but expression. And you, if you are conscious enough, feel the same alchemy within yourself. Your desire stops being hunger and becomes reverence. You no longer reach to take, you listen to receive. You begin to understand that real intimacy is not the collapse of boundaries, but their mutual recognition. Every archetype within her, the maiden, the lover, the mother, the mystic, now dances in coherence. No longer fragmented, no longer divided between what she shows and what she hides. She is whole, and that wholeness is the most erotic thing you will ever witness. The readiness you sensed before words was never about you. It was her soul aligning with her own truth. And you, if you were aware, simply became the mirror that allowed it. That's why Jung taught that love is not possession, but individuation through reflection. To love is to see and to be seen without losing oneself. When she reaches this point, she no longer looks for safety in your gaze. She carries it within her. And that is the ultimate signal. When her attraction no longer needs validation, only recognition. You can feel the transformation in the air. A quiet unity that doesn't need touch to exist. A current between two psyches that have stopped performing and started being. Desire, once primal and chaotic, becomes conscious. It no longer pulls, it flows. It no longer seeks to merge, it harmonizes. And that's when you realize every signal she gave was not an invitation to act, but an invitation to awaken. To meet her not as body or idea, but as mirror of your own consciousness. When she is ready, truly ready, she doesn't need to say a word. Because readiness is not about seduction, it's about surrender to truth. The kind of truth that can only exist between two people who have faced their shadows and survived them. This is the integration where desire becomes wisdom and attraction becomes awareness. She's not yours. You're not hers. You are reflections, completing the circle of remembrance. In the quiet that follows, you'll feel it, the same still flame that lives in both of you. Not demanding, not consuming, just existing. Steady, warm, infinite, and if you listen closely, you'll hear the soul's whisper.